needed.
We cannot be a thriving city and we have 4-year-old blood shed in the street.
The Detroit City Council voted 7-1 yesterday to approve the increase from $75 to $250 for the first offense. A second offense will go from $100 to $500. Attorneys for Shondity Combs want a federal judge to release him from jail. They're requesting he be let out on a $50 million bail and allowed to reside in his Miami home ahead of his October 3rd sentencing. And Baltimore City Public School students and children 12 and under can
Host Stella Cement.
Welcome to the Monitor's Mic, where we talk oversight, policing, and you. I'm Stella Cement, your host and the Independent Police Monitor for the City of New Orleans. And with me is Chriselle Williams, our Deputy Police Monitor. This show is your go-to source for discussing policing, law enforcement oversight, and how it all impacts you. From the Office of the Independent Police Monitor, we offer an independent perspective on city government. The Office of the Independent Police Monitor, OIPM, serves as a crucial civilian oversight body for the New Orleans Police Department, NOPD. We ensure transparency and accountability within the police department by making sure that NOPD follows their policies, advised by the consent decree, and is compliant with all local, state, and federal laws. We, your hosts, are not police officers, but we are experienced attorneys from the criminal legal field, dedicated to transparency and accountability. We encourage you to call in today with your questions, comments, and concerns. You can reach us on the air at 504-582-9422. While we may not be able to address individual cases, we are committed to following up with you. Today, we're going to be discussing only facial recognition software and technology and talking about two ordinances that are currently being considered by the New Orleans City Council to change or lift the prior restrictions on the NOPD's ability to utilize this software. So with that, let's learn more about today's guest. Chriselle?
Today, we are privileged to be joined by Councilmember at Large J.P. Morrell. J.P. Morrell is a lifelong New Orleanian, Tulane University law graduate, and former public defender who's led major reforms from ending Jim Crow jury laws to protecting survivors of violence. Now serving citywide as council member at large, he champions transparency, utility fairness, and funding for local communities. As a senator, JP passed landmark legislation to protect survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence and led the effort to require unanimous juries in felony trials. He also championed the Equal Rights Amendment, fought to end the pink tax on feminine hygiene products and diapers, and helped stabilize Louisiana's budget as chair of the Senate Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Committee, securing vital funding for colleges, hospitals, and public services. Today, as a city council president and chair of both the governmental affairs and utility, cable, telecommunications, and technology committees, JP has led efforts to improve accountability in city government, lower utility costs, and launch the City Council Recreation and Culture Fund, which puts over $7 million annually into the hands of grassroots organizations making real change across New Orleans. JP has always focused his advocacy on solutions and is committed to fighting for the changes needed to make our city the best that it can be for all of us. We asked Councilmember Morrell to come today on the show to primarily discuss and address the NOPD and facial recognition technology. We are going to focus on getting his stance on facial recognition technology for the police department, and we are going to dive into two ordinances that are currently being considered by the council, one of which will lift previous restrictions on NOPD's ability to use the technology, and another co-wrote by Councilmember Morrell that will require additional transparency around this technology. So you all that are listening, again, if you have any questions or input about this topic today, please give us a call at 504-582-9422. So thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show today, Councilmember Morrell.
Thank you. I'm excited.
So when talking about facial recognition technology, I know everyone's waiting and ready to get into that, but we usually frame this conversation about public safety. So first, let's establish, what does public safety actually mean to you?
Well, I think I've always felt that the problem we have in the city is there's a difference between making the public feel safe and making the public actually safe. Mm-hmm. And I think that when we came into office in 2022, when crime was at an all-time peak, there were a lot of questions about dealing with the buzzwords of safety. And as you may recall, there was a huge scandal when we found out that NOPD was basically cooking the books on crime stats, where they were hiding that certain crimes were actually higher than they said they were, and depressing the values of certain crimes to kind of get the public to feel safe. And even then, we challenged NOPD leadership at that time that you need to give people the position that they can have faith in the NOPD and its transparency and accountability and honesty, that you need to tell us what's really going on, tell us how you're going to address it, and tell us what mechanisms are going to do that. The reality, for example, there's been a fixation for the last 3 years on the size of the NOPD, and that as we went through COVID, NOPD dropped to its lowest levels, damn near 800 officers. And there was this fixation on how do we get to 1,200 officers, and a lot of efforts to try and convince the public that we need to drop everything else we're doing in city government. We need to redirect all spending to NOPD to get to this magic 1,200 number without facing a basic reality, which is that post George Floyd, post Black Lives Matter, post a lot of things going on in the country, there is a shortage of people who want to enter the police profession. And so I think what's happened over the years, and I think why there's some additional credibility with NOPD, is they moved away from the scare tactic, I want to make you feel safe, to really addressing how to make NOPD more accountable, more lean, more flexible, and how they deal with things to make us actually safe. Because the reality is that though the crime rate has dropped significantly to the lowest in 20, 30 years, the size of the force has not changed dramatically. It's really been changed with how we police, how we make available additional services like the mobile crisis unit, for example, all these different things that are kind of ancillary to police, but also prevent people from having to call the police. The amount of money we spent on Thrive Kids in the Orleans Parish Public School System to provide social workers to kids in schools, all those different things that we're doing around the community to impact people who ultimately might have become victims or perpetrators of crime. By having a holistic approach, we've reduced crime. So for me, public safety is making people actually safe and not scaring them into thinking they have to give up their rights to be safe, if that makes sense.
So, what is the responsibility then of city council as it pertains to the idea of public safety?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, the city council's primary role when it comes to public safety is to forcing accountability within OPD. Now, from a very basic, original level, our primary responsibility is as fiduciary agents with how they spend money and collect money. Right now, we're facing a tremendous deficit of almost $70 million because of pure overtime from our first responders. Now, obviously, that's going to be challenging going into next year's budget season, and a lot of that is tied to both the January 1st attack as well as the escape from the jail. But we have to look at the way NOPD is spending money and hold them to account that the money being spent was spent in the most frugal and appropriate way, and that money is not being misspent. The second way that we interact with NOPD is on things like facial recognition. When it comes to policies where the city has to make significant investments or spend money, we get to weigh in on how that technology is used. There's also a third way right now, which is kind of in its very nascent stage, where there is an effort by some council members, including myself, to look at the consent decree and look at the potentiality of codifying parts of the consent decree into ordinance, because there are a lot of people in the community who really feel like the consent decree has been transformative for NOPD, and they have tremendous concerns that after sustainment ends, there are key reforms that will pretty much cease to exist. For the most part, my understanding is as things stand now, those reforms will transition into policy, but policy versus ordinance can be changed by a police chief on a whim. So there are some policies in the department that are rule related that trigger council review, but for the most part, almost all policies do not require council review.
So, what I'm hearing is basically the city council, when it comes to the police department, you all look at the fiduciary and the budgeting of NOPD and making sure they're spending it in the most wise and frugal way as possible. And also that you're looking at their policies basically. And right now, of course, the facial recognition technology that we're all talking about, and also looking how to codify parts of the consent decree into ordinance so that it can actually be in our laws and not can be changed by future chiefs, right?
Right.
So, in that same, by extension, then, well, what is the city council? What is the power that you have over oversight agencies like the OIPM or the Office of Inspector General?
We really don't have any authority over them. That's by design. The OIG and OIPM are actually in the city charter. And part of the reason why they were created that way was to insulate them from interference by almost all governmental agencies. Their budgets are fixed by a portion of the budget, and we can make recommendations to the OIG and OIPM. We can say, hey, you should look at these things. But as far as our oversight, we don't really have direct oversight. I do work with both departments. I do try to help them if they believe that their powers need to be expanded in certain ways, try to advocate for that. But for the most part, all of their power is vested in the charter, which is the appropriate way it should be done. Will note that occasionally, for example, I want to say in 2012 or 2013, I worked with Susan Hudson when she was the OIPM to expand some of their subpoena authority through the state by changing some tweaks in law, but that's at the state level. So as the council member, there's really not much authority we have over them.
Okay, so we talked about what powers you have over the police, but I want to ask this kind of a bit more pointedly. Can you say no to the police? Can you say, no, you cannot use this tactic, no, you cannot use this technology, or no, you cannot use this equipment?
Especially because you said that you have the ability to give funding to the NOPD for them to be able to use it on certain technologies. Therefore, you're allowed to weigh in on how they use those technologies. what that sounds like, and I know this is going to be kind of paternalistic, but it's like you're a parent and you're giving allowance to someone, but then you're saying, I also get to decide how you spend your allowance and then how you use the toys that you bought with your allowance.
That is true to some degree, and I think that's probably a good way to look at it. I mean, if you're trying to simplify kind of that interaction, there is certainly a fine line between kind of a broad area like facial recognition and the technology and investment that's needed to do it, and the day-to-day operations of the NOPD. So when it comes to policy, like a larger policy, let's say, for example, the council, I believe, and we've never done it, could have some significant insight on limiting or changing overtime, for example, because we have to pay it. When it comes to the daily operations, like how a different task force operates within NOPD, the council has never really used its ability to deal with the minutia of how the department operates. When it comes to facial recognition in particular, I think why the council has consistently been required to weigh in is because it does require the NOPD to some degree to make really substantial investments in getting that technology and accessing it. In addition, there has been a lot of public input and outcry on these particular topics, which really kind of empowers the council to maybe go a bit beyond just the typical, do you get to buy more cars or not? So because the public has really pushed upon the council to weigh in particular when it comes to facial recognition and cell sites simulation, I think that's also empowered the council to some degree. I personally, and I think this council term would reflect that, I believe that the council should get involved in more things. Historically, the council has gotten involved in nothing. I mean, for the most part, we have been a city that's operated under a strong mayor model where councils historically give tremendous deference to the mayor. And I would say in this term, more than any other term that I've seen in my life, living my whole life in New Orleans, this council has been much more active in giving pushback on areas where we think NOPD departments have overstepped or a mayor has overstepped. And I think in particular, the fact the council weighed in on facial recognition at all, originally, the fact that we created the original ordinances, I think Jason Williams had the original total ban. The council had an ordinance in 2022 that dealt with allowing it in some instances with very, very tight guardrails. And now we're here today with these two new ordinances. That is the council continually trying to walk the line between what the public wants, what activists and what organizations like the ACLU think is permissible, and what the NOPD wants. And I mean, it's not a comfortable place for the council to be, but it's a necessary place to be, because sometimes the council does have to weigh in on the side of the public to say, yeah, I know you want to do this thing, but the people that are being governed have grave concerns, and we have to weigh in a much more direct and specific way.
So let's talk about that dynamic between the council and the people. And by the people, I mean your constituents, effectively the people that you work for. Do you ever feel comfortable saying no to the public in a scenario where the public is saying, we don't feel safe, we want a tank to be purchased by the department and to be stationed on every block that has a homicide rate of this a year? Can you say no?
Absolutely. I think the part of being, when you are elected to an office as an elected official, there are two governing principles I live by. One is to never let down my constituents. And by that, I mean to use my best judgment to look at why they elected me and adhere to the principles of why I was elected. We are a democracy, but we are not a society where every decision's a referendum. If we were, as government, to tell people that before I do anything, I have to stop and everyone has to vote and we have to have a poll, it would paralyze government. That's why we have elections, because the way the public weighs in as to whether or not they believe your judgment and your decisions were sound is at election time. We are always faced with situations where there is a desire by the public, and oftentimes, like I said, feel safe versus be safe, where you have people that try to sell the public on a short-term solution that is a long-term problem. And you have to really, as an elected official, have the position that I know what I'm doing. This thing will have a long-term benefit to the city of New Orleans, and people will realize over time I made the right decision. Because I will tell you, as a new council member, one of the things that was very jarring when I came in was the decision paralysis on the council. People would know something is going wrong, but there was really an idea that if I do nothing, that's the safest thing to do, because no one can criticize me if I just don't make a decision. I mean, whether you love or hate me, at the end of the day, I think people can say that I'm decisive. And I tend to trust my judgment, trust that what I'm doing is the best interest of the public, and trust that at the end of the day, when I'm up for reelection, or even more importantly, when I leave public office, people will look back at the time where I served and go, that guy did good things that move the city forward. I think that if you govern from that perspective, that I need to do what's best for my constituents. And sometimes when they're scared in the moment, they don't know that. Like when there was the big push originally on facial recognition in 2022, crime was at a unprecedented level. What we passed was not what NOPD or advocates at that time wanted.
Right.
The NOLA Coalition, all those groups were like, you need to have every camera in the city tracking everyone's face constantly. And there was a reason why the council compromised and created a ban on facial recognition, but allowance for cameras and allowance for cell site use in some limited areas with tremendous warrants and other accountability. That was an effort by the city council to say, we're not going to give you what you're scaring people into think they need. We're going to give you what we think is appropriate. And from my perspective, that's kind of our role. Like you have to really look holistically at what is being put before you. And I mean, as a former public defender, I am very bullish on people's personal rights. And I think when people are scared, they are more than willing to volunteer up those personal rights, thinking that it makes them safer. And in many times it doesn't. It doesn't make them safer. It may make them feel safe. Like having a camera on every corner may make you think that you're safe, but does it make you safe? Because the reality is that if there's a camera on every corner tracking everything you do, and people in power arbitrarily get to decide how that's used, and at some point, something that you'd never intended, for example, I know we're not getting into facial recognition yet, but like that's been one of the real big pushbacks for advocates who are concerned that whether you're an immigrant, whether you're someone who's escaped human trafficking, whether you are someone, let's say, for example, you're a domestic violence victim who has escaped your police officer, boyfriend, or husband, or girlfriend who's stalking you. That technology can be abused very, very easily in a way you don't intend. So there needs to be, when it exists, there needs to be tremendous rails on it. And any effort to expand its use has to be looked at and strictly construed against government, in my opinion.
I hear you. Now, I want to go back to the first part of your answer where you were talking about how you view yourself as a decisive person. And I think that is going to be without any type of doubt. You
Right.
are a decisive person. Can you take us behind the scenes on how you make judgment calls when it comes to how the police can police? What's your mental process? How is that sausage made? Do you do research? Do you look to other jurisdictions? Do you draw from personal experience or professional experience?
I think it's a combination of really all those points. I mean, obviously, I have family that's in law enforcement. I kind of know how the police department operates. Both my dad and I were both public defenders and criminal defense lawyers, which makes for very awkward dinner conversations sometimes.
Or really fun.
Really fun. But so, I mean, I kind of see both perspectives when it comes to the act of policing and the act of prosecution of crimes. And I think fundamentally, as someone who, my background was in criminal defense, the way I look at it is when it comes to proving guilt or innocence, it's the government's job to prove someone committed a crime. And yes, you want to make resources available so that victims can have their day in court and that those who are wronged can have justice and those who have committed crimes can be brought to justice. But you don't ever want to have that scale imbalanced where resources that are made available can be used against the wrong people. I mean, there's there's a reason why we have Miranda rights. There's a reason why we have Brady disclosures, because we've had so many instances historically where when the government has ultimate power to prosecute and close a case, they cut corners. That is why we have all these landmark Supreme Court cases. It's why when you get told the right to remain silent, all these different things, they don't exist gratis. They exist because the abuse of government required the Supreme Court to weigh in that this had to change. And when you look at technology, you look at AI, for example, because facial recognition and AI are directly linked.
Yes.
And you look at things like the recent settlement from the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office on a misidentification with facial recognition, there's tremendous liability. There's tremendous damage that can be done. I mean, having someone locked up for days in jail only to prove an innocent, that person doesn't go back to their life, depending on whether they had a job, whether they had job prospects, whether people thought for a couple of days they were, guilty of a crime. All those things have real consequences. So whenever I look at a request by any law enforcement agency to expand their resources, to expand their ability to police, I do try to give them the benefit of the doubt to some degree that they're doing that in the best interest of the public. But I always, at the same time, look at it as, how could this possibly go wrong? I mean, it's kind of like you have to, and I guess it makes me a cynical person. I always look at things like I plan for the worst but hope for the best, which is, it actually makes me a cynical person. But I think that when you're in government, that's the safest way to do it, because you can't assume that everybody who gets access to a different technology or a different ability to police or do something, that every single person is going to do it in the best way. And so if you look at it from, well, how can I prevent the worst case scenario, and I work back from that, then the amount of people that are negatively going to be impacted by that new policy, by that new technology, you're kind of constraining it.
So, one of the police chiefs that I talked to somebody I talked to at the Center for Policing Equity said that a police chief that they work with always says whenever you're introducing any type of new equipment or technology into a police department, you have to work with your lowest common denominator. You have to imagine how that equipment or how that technology will be used in the hands of the lowest common denominator, which fits into the cynical view of prepare for the worst. So if we were viewing life that way, all equipment that way, all tools in the toolkit that way, then we wouldn't allow people to have access to nail guns. We wouldn't allow people to have access to screwdrivers, because those could be weapons. And so shouldn't we just see technology as one of the many tools in the toolkit? And if we teach officers how to do it safely, how do we justify not giving them a tool that could help them catch violent criminals? How do we justify that?
Well, two perspectives. One, I would argue that there are plenty of people I know, including myself, who should never use a nail gun.
Fair, myself included.
Same.
But I think that when you're talking about those examples, you're talking about people, the average person having agency in the choice of whether or not they want to use a nail gun or have a nail gun used in their house. When you're talking about empowering law enforcement with new technology, you are not giving every person that will be exposed to that technology a choice. You're opening a door. And once that door is open, it's very hard to close it. I'll give you an example. One of the most basic things law enforcement officers can use is the ability to run your name into, what is the damn name of the system? I'm drawing a blank.
NCIC.
NCIC. And people don't understand all of your information is in NCIC. Now, I'm going to use an example, and I'm on WBOK, so people are getting mad at me. The Ann Broad case with the mayor with Vappy, where they used police technology to run her name, to go dig up the fact that she had a messy divorce and everything else. And when they filed that restraining order against her, they listed a bunch of information that no one should have had access to unless they use NCIC. That is the most basic type of technology officers have their hands on. Now, I'll tell you, as having brothers and family in law enforcement, they are trained repeatedly to not use that technology for any personal reason. Like, they are told, if you are caught doing this, they will kick you out of being able to use this database. However, people do it all the time. Officers, other people look at NCIC, they look up their girlfriend, look up their kids' date. They look at it and they go, you know, I don't really want to do a background check, but I know somebody in law enforcement. Hey, can you run Johnny's name?
Mm-hmm.
That is very invasive. But imagine if you had an officer who was like, where's Johnny been the last 2 weeks? My daughter says he hasn't been returning the calls. Hey, Jim, can you put Johnny's picture in the facial recognition and see if you could find him in the city, what he's been doing? That's what I worry about. And the thing is that the problem is that when you're talking about a type of technology that can only be utilized by law enforcement, I'll tell you, even though we currently work with, the NOPD and other law enforcement agencies work with Project NOLA, for example, here's something people don't realize about Project NOLA. If NOPD calls Project NOLA and says, we think this thing happened on this corner, we want to get access to your cameras. It's part of what I think Helena's bill does.
Right.
We want to get access to what happened on this corner. Can you help us? They go, you tell us what you need and we'll tell you if it's there. Now, let me tell you, as a person, that should scare the crap out of you.
Why?
2 reasons. One, what if the information on that video clears you of the crime, shows that it wasn't you? Project NOLA is not required like NOPD would under Brady to disclose that information. They choose what they give NOPD and what they don't give NOPD. What should also scare you with a private company doing that is, what if the dude who did the crime works at Project NOLA?
Mm.
So, I mean, like, when it comes to facial recognition technology, whether it's utilized in the private or public sector, it's terrifying. There are pros and cons to both of it. But my concern as an elected official, as a city council member, is that when we buy into that technology, when we make it readily available, you cannot ignore all of the unintended consequences. And my biggest concern is that in 2022, we passed a very limited, closed in scope compromise that the Washington Post showed pretty objectively NOPD found a way around. And I think that when you look at it from that perspective, how do you have, in the last couple of months, serious accusations come out that the technology was abused and people circumvented the law, and then say, we're going to pass a newer, more expansive law, but they're going to follow the law now? I mean, those are real serious concerns. And something encounters I've had with the ACLU is, what's the rush? Because if this is something technology they really want and they desperately need, why not work with people like the OIPM and others to get feedback from the public that will be impacted on this, hear their concerns, spend 6 months, spend 8 months, spend a year building public consensus that everyone agrees this is necessary and the value outweighs the risk. I am tired as a council being told, trust us, when we have from 2022, trust us didn't work.
So you said that in 2022, the ordinance was sidestepped. And in your video that you posted online, you said that the spirit of the 2022 ordinance was effectively violated, which is suggesting that NOPD violated the law. So say they did, say that was a violation of the law. What happens? Do we put the department in jail?
Well, I think what we're waiting for right now, and I know you're aware of this, is the chief is doing an investigation based on the Washington Post article, and we have not got that investigation back. Based upon that investigation, I do think any officers that were involved in using that technology should be disciplined, because the NOPD should show everyone that if you break the law, there is a recompense for it. So, I mean, you can't lock up the NOPD as an organization, but certainly I think that if NOPD wants to rebuild trust with the public, they need to explain what was the consequence for the people that decided to circumvent the law by signing up for alerts from Project NOLA. I mean, the reality is this. It is not overly burdensome to get a warrant. It simply is not. And that argument that I've heard time and time again, that getting a warrant is so hard, as someone who's a public defender who often had to fight probable cause, judges grant warrants pretty much the drop of that. The only magistrate court judge who ever gave pushback on warrants was Joe Giarruso's dad. He used to regularly have people show up at his house at 1 a.m. going, I need a warrant for this thing. And he'd be like, nope, you don't have probable cause. The one person actually read it and saw if the probable cause was BS or not was old Judge Giarruso. For the most part, judges just sign it and say they'll figure it out later probable cause hearing as to whether the warrant was good to begin with. That being said, the fact that after 2022, it's obvious that the NOPD found the warrant requirements burdensome, that's not my problem. That's their problem. Now, when it comes to exigent circumstances, like, for example, something they cite frequently is the escape from the jail.
Yeah, let's talk about
Yeah,
that.
like-
because it was utilized in being able to apprehend one of the individuals who escaped from the jail. And I will also duly highlight that that apprehension was peaceful, as in
Right.
it didn't escalate. It wasn't dangerous for any bystanders. It happened in the French Quarter on a crowded day. And the people that were out there didn't have to worry about their safety. And proponents of this technology say not only, one, is this proof that the technology works, we were able to find this individual and find him fast, but two, we were able to have a much more thoughtful approach to ensure that we didn't approach when there was a car nearby that he could get into or use to ram us. We made sure that he didn't have a gun on him. We made sure that we approached when there weren't children standing about. Our approach was safer for officers and for the public
Well, one,
using this technology,
I-
coupled with live surveillance, of course.
I would say one, the idea that the facial recognition cameras identified that he wasn't armed and that people weren't around. I think that officers who secured the area saw that. I don't think that was all in the facial recognition cameras. Two, as I've said repeatedly, other agencies have access to this technology. U.S. Marshals, Louisiana State Police. I only have control over the New Orleans Police Department. I think that when it comes to exigent circumstances, like inmates fleeing a prison, those agencies can use whatever resources they have available to them to do that. One of the biggest concerns I have, and it is not alleviated by those concerns, is that when you use taxpayer dollars to build this extensive facial recognition surveillance network, you do not control what other agencies can abuse it. And that goes back to my video talking about ICE and everything else that's going on with that.
Right,
because
right.
the reality is that when the state legislature passes a law that goes into effect today,
Right.
that says that if you do not comply with ICE as law enforcement, as an elected official, an appointed official, you go directly to jail. I know that I've had conversations with Chief Kirkpatrick, and I believe her. She's like, if they come to me, I'll go to jail. And I'm like, you know what, Chief? I think that you would actually make them cuff you.
You know what? I actually do
I believe it
that.
too.
I believe it.
But what I also tell her is somewhere down the line when they've cuffed the third person in the order, someone's going to say, okay, I don't want to go to jail.
Yeah, that's
And
assuming it gets to the third.
that's, I mean,
yeah.
so like the reality is that when I hear those arguments, the agencies that need access to that technology already have it. I can't control how to utilize it. I can only control the department that's under the council's jurisdiction where we have some interaction. Also, that being said, if this is something, I mean, going back to and I get really triggered when they talk about how this would have stopped January 1.
Yeah, let's
That
ask
is-
that.
that
Do you
is
think
com-
it would have stopped
That
January
is
1?
completely asinine. The individual who committed that horrendous terrorist act was on no one's watch list, was not a wanted criminal. He was just a guy. We did use that technology in retrospect, which could have been done with a warrant, to see what he did prior. But as far as what happened, no law enforcement agency in the United States had this guy on their radar. So
Right.
facial recognition wouldn't have caught. Now, what I will say, and I said in my video, everyone should be pissed off at Meta because this guy was on Facebook and Instagram driving from Texas saying what he was going to do.
Right.
And if they had eliminated all the people who look at hate speech and look at threats, the guy might have gotten stopped before he came here. But as far as like in retrospect and hindsight, when it comes to the inmates who escaped from the jail, there is merit to that argument, but that the issue that needs to be resolved is covered by their agencies.
Right.
And when it comes to January 1st, I mean, unless you are Minority Report and you knew the guy was going to commit the crime, it wouldn't have solved anything.
Which was one of your book recommendations.
Yes.
But I want to go back to this idea of other agencies. Let's just
Yes.
follow that hypothetical through to the end. So, say that LSP is able to be effectively the only Louisiana law enforcement agency in the city utilizing this software. So, they're able to utilize the software and say their arrests go up because they're utilizing the software and they're able to apprehend more individuals. We want to flag that due to the cooperative endeavor agreement that was signed by our district attorney and the state AG, now all arrests that are completed by the Louisiana State Police in Orleans Parish can be prosecuted by the state, not Orleans Parish. And I know this is very long-winded, so bear with me. But if NOPD isn't utilizing the software, and if the software isn't going away and it's being used by LSP, they arrest more people, then the state AG has jurisdiction, complete jurisdiction, over the prosecution. That means she gets to decide what to charge those individuals with and what to prosecute those individuals with. Aren't we giving a lot of our Orleans power away to Baton Rouge? Aren't we giving our policing power away to Baton Rouge? And by extension now, our prosecutorial power away to Baton Rouge. Is that something that concerns you?
Well, the relationship between the AG and the DA's office and LSP and NOPD is a very extensive one. And I think that going back to the feeling safe versus being safe, I think that there are benefits and there are negatives to that relationship. To your point, as you know, under our state constitution, original jurisdiction, every single parish resides with the district attorney. That relationship is less problematic to me because at any given time, the district attorney of the city of New Orleans can relinquish that and take it back. So as far as like the overreach issue, I think as far as prosecution, that's a choice the district attorney has made, and due to a variety of different considerations. Staffing is a big one. The availability, as you know, the availability of his staff as well as NOPD staff to both arrest and prosecute, I think those are some of the considerations he did when he made that agreement. As I said originally, I don't think just because it's easier for LSP to round up people for the AG to prosecute them means that as a city, we should make it easier for NOPD to round up people to prosecute them. I think that from my perspective, that is a slippery slope argument. There are plenty of things the state of Louisiana does and prioritizes that we do not prioritize. I'll give you a great example using facial recognition. The state of Louisiana has a plethora of laws dealing with reproductive rights and doctors and how they interact with their patients. There has been plenty of comments by our AG that she intends to enforce those laws wherever they go. If you have an extensive city-funded facial recognition network, then that just gives more ability for people who utilize that network to enforce laws, some of which we don't agree with. And this was actually an argument we made during the first in 2022, the challenge you have is that there's this idea that when you open the doors to the use of this kind of technology and the prevalence and use of camera networks, that we will somehow have it insulated from everyone at the state and federal level. And I call complete BS on that. I think that if you create the network, if you create the ease in which it is to surveil your populace, you absolutely do not have control over who else utilizes it. Project NOLA, for the most part, is voluntary. Businesses decide to put a Project NOLA camera on their business, and they are choosing to be part of the Project NOLA surveillance network. When you bring the city in as an agency that can install cameras on every light pole and everything else, that is a whole different level from my perspective. So I think it's comparing apples to oranges because, you really, once you supercharge something with the authority and funding of the government and you open that door, you don't control how it's utilized.
So let's talk about when that door is only opened by private industry then. Because if we're saying that NOPD can't occupy this space, someone is going to.
Someone does.
And somebody does.
Somebody does, correct.
And so that brings me to an argument that I titled the Batman argument, which I'm hoping goes over with you because we know you like Marvel and DC. But if private individuals and companies can access the software and it can proliferate, they can keep using it and doing it, making it bigger and more and develop this technology because the government and the police are not in the game, then are we effectively creating vigilantes? Are we creating a world where now private industry needs to move into the space that our police officers should be in? Our government agencies, our NOPD should be in this space, and now they're being told they can't be, so private industry will do it for them.
Well, I think that is the purpose of the second ordinance. I think part of what, and that's that ordinance, I'm a co-author on it, but it
yeah,
is.
can
it's
you
kind
talk to us about that?
Yeah, basically the purpose of the second ordinance is really to create an environment where if the NOPD, if organizations want to work with NOPD using surveillance technology, that it creates a paper trail of when the technology is utilized, but B, it kind of creates some guardrails. For example, that example I used earlier, where if you have exculpatory evidence that's held by a third party, they actually have to turn it over.
Even if they're private entities.
Even if they're a private entity. So like part of the reason why I co-authored that, and it's really puts me, it's a very legislative kind of predicament. I support the ordinance that Council Vice President Moreno has because it addresses those issues. However, on the same breath, I do not support the expansion of surveillance. So from my perspective, I think that we as a city need to do our best to make sure that even those people in the private sector that want to work with NOPD, if they choose to do so, if there's some rails on it. That being said, it is the difficulty of being at the lowest level of government when preemption exists. If the federal government and state government decide they want to regulate these industries, they'd be regulated.
Right.
We're at the lowest part of this totem pole. And when it comes to technology in particular, the fact that Project NOLA, for example, could have a central headquarters, Mississippi or Alabama or somewhere else, it almost makes their use of surveillance. I mean, right now they're at UNO, but they could be somewhere else.
Right.
It triggers interstate commerce and all kinds of other issues. So it's like we're in a very difficult place as a New Orleans City Council because we can only regulate what we can regulate. And we're doing so in a field that's beset with landmines that are constitutional, that are legal, that are moral. And we just have to try and navigate it as best we can. So, I mean, like I said, the ordinance I think there are 4 of us on it. I want to say it's me, Leslie, Freddie, and Helena.
Mm-hmm.
That secondary ordinance is really an effort to try and alleviate the Batman problem, which is that if you're going to work with law enforcement, provide resources, that surveillance has to be constitutional. For me, and Mr. Lagarde's 100% correct, as a private agency, if ICE tells them we want information, he can tell them no. Mm-hmm. The law that was passed by Jay Morris does not apply to Project NOLA.
Right.
And so there is I guess I would say, with extreme caveats, a benefit in that the same laws that compel public entities to do what the legislature says as far as how we have to interact with federal law enforcement, it would almost require a federal act from Congress that is pretty much not doing anything to make private entities do stuff with ICE. And that hasn't occurred yet. It might occur. Might occur. But as of right now, there is no law that compels without a warrant or without probable cause a private entity to have to do that. So in a lot of ways, when it comes to like the rights of surveillance of the public versus the private agency has more rights and more privacy than the public would ever have in this current landscape.
So say, we get this question a lot, but I'm Jane Citizen. I'm a citizen that follows all the rules and regulations. I don't break any laws. I'm on straight and narrow at all times. So why would I care? Why would I care if you're recording me? Why would I care if my face is being scanned? Why does it matter to
I
me?
love that question. And I was talking to someone who asked that same question. I said, hey, do you ever give money to the homeless? They're like, yeah, I give $5 to the homeless. I said, okay. Let's say hypothetically, you're walking down Bourbon Street, you give $5 to someone you think is homeless. That person is actually an illegal immigrant. And ICE is trying to find that illegal immigrant. And you, little lady who's minding her own business, you were the last person to see it. Suddenly you get snatched up. You're in a chamber where they're trying to figure out, how do you know this person from Guatemala that you gave $5 to, and that now you're aiding and abetting an illegal immigrant because you provide that person with $5 when they were illegally inside the city of New Orleans. Let's say, for example, that you are a church group that feeds the homeless, and you feed the homeless at a certain location every week. And NOPD, LSP, ATF, they discover that there is a meth lab back there. And they determine that you are there around the same time that the meth sales are going down. And they use facial recognition to track you down and say, we think that you could have information on this. The reality is that surveillance is not just used to surveil criminals, it's used to surveil everyone. And how your interaction with any given person goes. I mean, not to go full 1984 V is for Vendetta, but if you have a government that chooses to surveil people based upon their speech, and let's say you're walking by a rally that's critical of the Trump administration, and you stop for a second and take a look, and in the footage they're looking at, it looks like you're part of that rally, and they round you up as a dissident. Well, you might not actually be a supporter of that group, but you have video footage of you being near that group at a time right before they went and vandalized the federal building. Like, you don't control when information is collected ad nauseum on a massive scale. You do not get to control, as the everyday person, how it's utilized for prosecution or to move forwards and surveil you. You just don't. I mean, you would hope. I mean, it's kind of when I was arguing with the chief of this, I was like, listen, if we were in an ideal society where the rule of law was being followed, we'd have a very different conversation right now. But literally, we at the Supreme Court recently ruled that the federal government can deport people who are illegal immigrants to countries they're not from. Like, the rules of like common sense and law have been completely disregarded. And if you think for a second there won't be a Supreme Court ruling in the next 2 or 3 years that tremendously expands the surveillance abilities of the federal government to expand to everything, then I have a Nigerian prince that would love to sell you some land.
I gotta know, is there any version of reality of retooling this ordinance that you would support? Is there any?
I mean, I honestly, from my perspective, I voted for the 2022 ordinance.
Right. So,
And I think that, first off, like I said, part of what gives me great pause is I think we have a great chief. I think we have a great NOPD. They weren't following 2022 ordinance.
Right.
So to have this push to do this situation without addressing the violations of the 2022 ordinance and selling the public on why it's absolutely necessary. Because remember, we were told in 2022, we desperately need surveillance. It's going to be a force multiplier. It's going to solve crime.
yeah.
If you talk to everyone involved in it, they haven't been using it. And crime has gone down.
Right.
So you told us, NOLA Coalition told us, if you don't give this to them with the lack of officers, everything's going to go to hell. It's going to be like Mad Max in the city of New Orleans. Part of what was required in that ordinance that was not followed was data collection showing how many of the individuals that were apprehended using facial recognition led to a conviction. We don't have clear data on that. Show me how what we gave you led to great outcomes and how the expansion of it would lead to better outcomes. I am not someone who gives people things because they want it. You tell me because you need it. So to your point, I think that if NOPD took a year to interact with the public, took a year to provide data on the 22 ordinance showing how it led to positive outcomes that were constitutional, and then came back to me, it'd be a different conversation. Instead, you get a WAPO article showing they're breaking the law, and then a month later they're following an ordinance. And it's like, that is the worst set of circumstances. And the public, and I mean, you add on top of that, the current overreach by the federal government on every level. I mean, you now have a immigration and customs enforcement that is larger than the FBI and CIA. And you're trying to tell me that we need this right now to go fight crime in New Orleans when crime's at its lowest it's ever been? I don't know. It's a hard sell.
So going back to this idea of the ordinance was violated, how come you haven't then asked for an amendment that creates more teeth to the 2022 ordinance, that creates some type of penalty to it?
Honestly, I think depending on what the outcome of Chief Kirkpatrick's investigation, where we have an actual set of facts that show how it was utilized, I think that's everything's on the table. But right now, we can't change the law based on a WAPO article where they conceal a lot of their sources. I mean, the fact that Chief has committed to do a full investigation, I'm not saying that the investigation, we're going to take it with a grain of salt when we see it, but
Of course.
we need to see what she found, see how thorough and how expansive the violation was. I mean, if you had a couple of rogue officers signed up for alerts, I would not see that as a systematic effort by the NOPD to circumvent the 2022 law, especially if there were not people in NOPD leadership that authorized it. If people in leadership authorized that circumvent of the law, then I think that would have us in a position where we'd have to revisit the 2022 law. But we're kind of waiting for that information, but I think it's a serious concern. I think that has to be addressed before you talk about expanding surveillance. I mean, you got to address how the current surveillance law was used.
So when you say NOPD leadership, out of curiosity, what level of leadership would you be looking for?
Oh, I don't know. I
Lieutenant,
mean,
captain,
not
major?
something higher than sergeant. I mean,
Higher than
than sergeant. I mean, because it'd have to be white shirts.
White shirts.
That'd be white shirts. I mean, because
so that's like captain or higher.
Captain or higher. I mean, because once you are going captain and higher, you're talking about policy. You're not talking about someone who's like, man, our crime stats are down. Hey, go sign up for those alerts. When you're talking someone who's in actual leadership, a white shirt, who authorizes that, that leads to questions in the council level of, was this a policy decision?
Mm.
Because, I mean, it's the same situation where when you have people who are doing things that are untowards that lead to criminal or civil prosecution, you don't throw out the entire department. You isolate those individuals and you see whether or not those were individual acts done by those people or were they condoned by the larger department. Same with this, I would imagine.
But it's difficult sometimes to legislate or create policy on a changing technology in a changing society. And sometimes our practice eats our policy. Sometimes we have to road test this stuff. Is this an example of practice potentially eating the policy?
I mean, I think that's a valid point. What I would say is what's very interesting to me is that in the city of New Orleans that currently has one of the lowest crime rates in the entire United States, passing this ordinance would put us at the forefront of the use of AI in the entire country as far as it comes to police usage of facial recognition and AI. And I don't think we need to be at the forefront of this. I think that I would rather have other cities lead on this effort and see how it turns out. I mean, there are tremendous amounts of people. We as a city have been a testing ground for a variety of different socioeconomic policies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when it comes to the expansion of AI, I think that it would make a lot more sense to look at other cities, see what their outcomes are. I mean, I'll tell you right now, I was a tremendous opponent of bringing Airbnb into the city of New Orleans. Then Mayor Mitch Landrieu decided that we wanted to be on the forefront of that. As they were doing that, I was in the legislature, and I had friends in San Francisco who were like, do not do this. It's the Wild West, and they will run over you. We did it, and we have been trying to put that toothpaste back in the tube ever since. The cities that came after us looked at us as a cautionary tale, and when they allowed Airbnb into their areas, they did so with tremendous scrutiny and guardrails to prevent the proliferation to devastate their housing market and affordable housing. Mm-hmm. Now we're looking at cities like New York and San Francisco taking their lessons. I mean, the platform accountability, which started today, which requires those platforms to confirm licenses before putting items on the internet, that came from New York. Mm-hmm. You know what would have saved us a lot of headache? Letting New York or San Francisco do Airbnb for a couple of years, seeing how it turned out, and then doing a better version of it.
Well, I see that we're coming up on time, so I do want to ask you this before you leave. As the council prepares to take up both ordinances, what are your final thoughts that you want the public to understand about this?
In a minute or less.
Minute or less.
Sorry.
I think that the public goes back to my first comment. Is it about being safe or feeling safe? I don't think this technology right now and the way it's proposed will make New Orleans safer. It may make you feel safe, but is feeling safe worth abandoning fundamental rights that could impact you and your family, could impact you and your friends, could impact you and your community? Mm-hmm. And I think that it is far more prudent to take this over a longer period of time, to look at other cities and what they're doing and how it turns out, and to not be on the forefront, because I don't want to be Airbnb'd again. I don't want to be the group where people look at us as the cautionary tale because we surveilled our entire population. It went terrible. Everyone was rounded up, and everyone else goes, man, that sucked what happened in New Orleans. Not going to do that.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Councilmember Morrell.
Great points. Great points.
Thank you.
That wraps up today's episode of the Monitor's Mic. A heartfelt thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in and staying engaged with the crucial conversations we're having about police oversight, community safety, and today in particular, facial recognition technology. Thank you so much to Councilmember J.P. Morrell for joining us today on the Monitor's Mic. Thank you for clarifying your position and running so many scenarios with us today. You gave our listeners thoughtful and comprehensive information about facial recognition software and how it will impact law enforcement and our city. And if you, the community, would like to continue the conversation, I would like you to join us at OIPM's upcoming public forum on facial recognition technology on Wednesday, August 6th from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. at the Treme Recreation Center located at 900 North Villery Street. The panelists will include Councilmember Oliver Thomas, NOPD, ACLU of Louisiana, and Ion Surveillance. Come out to share your thoughts, ask questions, and make your voices heard. Food will be served, and children are very welcome. We will also stream the forum on our social media platform for those that cannot attend and monitor the questions from our viewers. If you missed any part of today's show or want to catch up on any past episodes, visit our website at www.nolaipm.gov. You can find and follow us on YouTube at NOLA IPM, and you can also follow us on social media for updates and news. On Instagram, we're NOLA OIPM, and on Facebook, we're New Orleans Independent Police Monitor. So until next time, stay informed, stay involved, and stay committed to building a safer community. And this has been the Monitor's Mic.